Hey everyone, welcome to the Swift Arcade. I'm your host, Jonathan Rasmussen. So excited to have you back with us today, where we're going to continue our journey of building the Spotify application. Last episode, we took a look at how to build the title menu bar at the top. This is the menu bar that enables us to tap either music or podcast and animate in or out different view controllers depending upon what users tap. And today we're going to continue the journey looking at how to build this menu bar. We're going to see how we can build a menu bar that enables us to tap different buttons at the top, have different views slide in, and just continue building out this really great application. All right, let's continue. Okay, so just to set things up a bit, let's go over the architecture of how we're going to do this. What we're going to do is we're going to create a brand new view controller called Home Controller. And inside, that's going to contain a new UI view we're going to create called Menu Bar. Menu Bar is going to be a plain old UI view, but inside we're going to have three buttons representing these playlists, artists, and albums. When you just select a button, we're going to eventually add an interaction that's going to send that back to our home controller, and it is going to select the proper cell in a collection view. So inside our home controller, we're going to have a menu bar. Underneath that, we're going to have a collection view, which is going to have a horizontal flow layout. So that's going to enable people to swipe left and right and bring up either the playlists, artists, or albums as they slide through this collection view. Later on, we're going to add some different cells within that collection view. There'll actually be a collection view within the collection view, one that's going to enable us to scroll up and down, and that's going to consist of some track cells. But for now, don't worry about all that. All we're going to do for now is focus on this home controller, the menu bar, and then adding a collection view underneath that so that when you select one of these buttons, the right collection view appears. All right, let's jump in. Okay, so let's start by creating that home controller. Let's go into our app in Spotify. I'm going to go Command N to create a brand new Swift file called Home Controller. And let's just import UIKit. It's just going to be a class called Home Controller. It's going to extend UI View Controller. And let's do our usual override view did load work. Let's call super. And let's give this a background. Let's go view.background color is equal to our Spotify black, just so that we know we've selected this. And for our demo, where we left off, what our demo does right now is we've got this tile bar controller, which is doing our nice tile stuff. We're going to park that for now, just kind of set it aside and have our new view controller we just created here, Home Controller, take over this entire view. So I'm going to go into the app delegate, and I'm going to just comment out some code here. I'm going to comment out this navigation controller work. I'm just going to do that. And what I want to do is I just want to replace the root view controller that was doing our navigation controller, showing all that title stuff, with this new one that we've just created, this home controller. I'm just going to run that and verify that our new controller is now taken over the view. This is the one we're going to work with for our menu bar. And indeed it has. You can see it's got that nice Spotify black background. This is our canvas. This is where we're now going to do our work. So now that we're ready, let's go ahead and create that menu bar and start designing it and then add it to this home controller so we can see what it looks like. So let's go back into our app here. I'm going to go Command N to create a new file. This one I'm going to call menu bar. And in here, let's go ahead and add our import UIKit. And now this menu bar, this is just going to be a plain old UI view. So we're just going to go like that. And in there, we're going to have basically, when we build this, we want three buttons. And these are just going to be plain old UI buttons. And we're going to auto layout and space them out. So we've got playlists, artists, and albums. So why don't we go ahead and just add those like this. So I've got a playlist button, an artist button, an albums button, and this exclamation mark means assume these are going to be here. We're going to create those in our initializer. And I've got an array called buttons. We're going to stick all three of these. This is just going to hold all three of them, and you'll see why we do that in just a few minutes. But what we need right now in order to create this menu bar is an initializer. So let's go ahead and add one. Let's go ahead and override this standard init cdirect frame. And let's call super.init on it. Overriding the frame, I'm going to pass in a frame of 0, which means there's no size or anything to it. And we need this required initializer coder. So we'll go ahead and just import that. So now we need to create these buttons and use them. Now in Swift, when you instantiate a button like this with the exclamation mark, what you're really saying is this button is going to be instantiated and ready to go before you even call super. So we're going to instantiate and set those buttons up. But before we do, I'm just going to copy in one method. This is a convenience routine called makeButton. And this is just going to save us some typing. This function down here, which I'm defining just as a function in the generic overall scope of the entire program called makeButton. This is what we can use to make those buttons for us. So we're going to create a brand new UI button. We're going to turn on AutoLayout by setting translate auto size to be false. We can then set the title to be whatever string we pass in here. We're going to set a preferred font size of headline. This is Apple's newer font size. This is really nice. This is going to dynamically resize if people change the accessibility. And we'll set the adjust font size to fit width so that if we give our label less space, it will shrink and grow for the space given. So with that method now, I'm going to come back over here, and just before our initializer, I'm going to create our buttons like this by just calling that function makeButton, passing in the words playlist, album, artist, and I'm just going to collect them in that button array here, and you'll see why later. Okay, so that's good. That's kind of set up. Let's now add some target actions to these buttons so that when people click playlist, artists, and albums, different views are going to pop in. So we've created our buttons now, but now we need to add what's called a target action to them, or a selector. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring that in here. And we can do that after the super because now these objects have been instantiated. I'm going to go Command 0 just to make a little bit more space. And here we're just going to add some selectors called button tapped, artist tapped, album tapped. And these are the functions that are going to get called when these things occur. Now the way I like to add these is basically as extensions onto my menu bar. So I can just come down here and I can go make some space. I'm going to add an extension to my menu bar. And in here I can actually add those functions, playlist, artist, and album. So just to save a little bit of typing, I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And I'm not going to worry about these delegates yet. Those are going to come later. But basically, these are the functions that we're going to call when those buttons get tapped. And you'll note they start with the attribute here, Objective-C. This is just something we need when we hook up our buttons like this. But basically now we've got, it will compile now because we've added these selectors and our menu bar is looking better. Almost ready to go. The thing we need to do now is to do some layout for this. In other words, we need to lay it out and basically say, how are you going to appear on the screen? That's always the most fun part. So in our init here, I'm just going to create a function called layout. Let's come down here and actually do the layout. I'll even call it a private func here. Layout. And let's see, how do we want to lay this out? So we're not worried about music and podcasts. That's off the screen for now. This is our view controller here. We're just looking at this menu bar. We're going to want to have our button with some padding here, a little bit on the left. We're going to have some top. Then the artist is going to appear to the right of playlists and albums, to the right of artists. So let's just go ahead and lay that out using AutoLayout. And to start with, we need to add these buttons to our subview. So we being a view ourselves, we can simply call add subview, and we can add each button. So we're going to add the playlist button. Then we're going to add subview and add the artist button. And then we're going to add subview and add the albums button. Okay, so those buttons are now in our view hierarchy. We've got them already set up for AutoLayout because we set that flag to be translates equal to false. Now I'm going to use one of my little handy snippets here. I'm going to come in and add this activate constraint array. And now we just want to lay out our buttons. So let's start with our playlist button. Playlist button, I'm going to start with the top. So I'm going to go top anchor. That's going to be a constraint. And I've got a couple of options here. When you're doing auto layout, you've got this equal to system spacing below. So that's basically saying playlist button, I would like you to be equal to the system spacing. System spacing means there's a default attribute. Each multiplier is equal to 8 points. So if I wanted to put this 8 points beneath the top anchor, I could go top anchor here, multiplier of 1, and that would basically put this playlist button 8 points below the very top anchor of the view. I actually don't want it to be 8 points. I'm going to make it flush. I'm going to make it 0. There's actually even a simpler API. If you want it to be completely flush, you don't need to go equal to system spacing. You can just go equal to the constraint you want to pin it to, top anchor. You don't need this multiplier. And this will do the exact same thing. It's just a little bit more terse. So we're basically saying playlist button, come right up against the top here in terms of your top anchor. So that's what we're going to do for that guy. And then we're just going to continue doing that for playlist button. We're also going to go leading anchor. Your constraint is going to be equal to, we could do system spacing after, but I want this just to be, actually this one I do want to have some spacing around. And I want it to also have a constant. So if you don't want system spacing, but you want something a little bit more precise, you can use another one here called constant. And here I'm going to go, hey, playlist button, I want your leading anchor to be pinned to the leading anchor of our menu bar here. And this constant, I'd like this to be 16. Now 16 is a multiple of 8, so I could have gone a multiple of 2 here, but I actually need this number 16, and I'll show you why later. So we're just going to hard code it like that for now as 16. Now we actually don't need a trailing or bottom anchor for these because labels are what we call intrinsically sized. In other words, a label already knows what size it is when you lay it out here. So with these two constraints and the label knowing its size, that's all we need here. And if all this auto layout stuff is confusing and a little bit overwhelming if you're just getting into iOS, do check the show notes. I do have a course on this where I walk you through how to do all this in excruciating detail. It's a really necessary skill if you're going to build real apps in iOS, so I encourage you to check that out if you want to get more up to speed in auto layout. But I'll walk you through it as we also go through here. So that's our playlist button. Now we're just going to repeat and do the same thing with the artist button. So artist button, here we're going to just do the same top anchor. We're going to pin you to the top of the menu bar also. And here I just need that nice simple constraint, this guy here. So let's go top anchor again. And we'll do the same thing for the leading, except playlist. If I bring you over here, sorry, artist. Artist comes just after playlist here with some space. So we're going to pin the leading of artist to the trailing constraint or anchor of playlist. So let's go artist button. Its leading anchor, that constraint is going to be equal to, now the one I want here has a constant. So let's go down to this guy. This is going to be leading anchor is going to follow the playlist button trailing anchor, and I'd like that space to be 36, just because I've done this before and I know I like that to be 36. So we're going ahead and pin that to there. So that takes care of artist button. Now we just need to also set up the album button. It's going to be the exact same. It's going to have a top. It's going to have a leading coming after the artist trailing. So I'm just going to copy this work here, and this is going to be our album button. So the top is set up, and the album button leading is going to follow the artist button by the same amount of 36 points. We'll stick you there. And at that point, we should have those buttons more or less laid out. Okay, great. But to actually see this now, we need to add the menu bar to our home controller to see what it looks like. Command 0. Let's go back to our home controller now and see if we can't bring it up and actually take a look and see what this menu bar is going to look like. So let's just start here. How do we bring a menu bar into our home controller? We're just going to create it as a let. This thing actually doesn't need to change the reference to itself ever. So we're going to create it as a let, and it is going to be a menu bar. We're just going to create you. And then we just need to do layout in here also so that we can lay out the menu bar within our view controller here. So I'm going to go ahead and create that same similar kind of function, just following that same pattern we did before. I like just to pull the layout out of the viewDidLoad method and kind of do it explicitly on its own down here. And so for the menu bar, we are going to make sure it is ready to go for auto layout by turning off its auto sizing mask constraints, setting that to false. We then need to add it to the subview. So here we need to go view.add subview because we're in a view controller here. So we need to get our view before we can add it to the subview. And here we're going to go add menu bar. So now it's part of the view hierarchy. And now we need to lay it out using our handy activate constraints array. We need to label, we need to take this menu bar basically. And just like we did with the buttons in the menu bar, now we're going to lay this menu bar out within this view controller. So we just have to figure out its top, leading, trailing, and bottom. Just in the interest of time, I'm just going to actually copy these in and we'll walk through what these constraints are doing. So for menu bar top, let me just bring this over here so we can see what this looks like. For menu bar top, we're going to go ahead and pin that to what's called the safe area layout guide. That's the safe area within every view controller. This is Apple's recommended way of doing this now. We're going to pin it to the safe area layout guide top anchor. So that's going to be completely on the top. Then in the leading, we're just going to pin it directly flush. We're going to go leading, trailing. So our menu bar is going to come all the way over. And then we're going to give it a height of 42. And with that, let's just run this and see what happens. And voila, there we go. Yeah, it's not looking too bad. We've got our playlist here. These are our buttons. They do have targeted actions hooked up to them. They're not doing anything yet, but we've got them on the screen and they're more or less spaced and sized the way we like them. So good stuff. Okay, so now that we've got our buttons on the screen, let's go ahead and see how we can actually add some views so that as we page and scroll here, different views will come up and will be tied with these buttons. So what we're really doing here, if we just take a look, is we've got our menu bar laid out. We're going to add a collection view to our home controller, set up so that it can horizontally have a flow layout. And we're just going to display a different cell every time someone swipes left or right here. So let's go ahead and see how we can set that up. Let's jump back into Xcode. Just going to minimize this. And let's start by defining our collection view. So here we are in our home controller. So collection view is a really nice control. It's a scroll view that has, it's like a table scroll view, in that you've got elements that you can just put in there and you can either flow vertically or horizontally. So we're going to create one right now. We're going to create this one a little bit differently than how we instantiated this menu bar. We are going to go lazy var collection view. And this is going to be a UI collection view. And if you're new to Swift, this might look a little bit foreign and strange what we're doing here. This is something called a computed property. And basically what we're doing is we're going to create a collection view of a type collection view, and we're going to execute some code which is going to appear in here. So we're actually going to return a collection view all in here. And this is a slightly different way of instantiating and creating variables in Swift. Let's just continue and I'll show you what I mean. When you create a collection view, you need to define the layout of the collection view. And in our case, this is going to be something called a collection view flow layout. So this is the flow layout. Every collection view has a way that it describes its layout. We have to explicitly create this and then give it some properties like scroll direction. I'm just going to go command period to enable autocomplete to run a little bit better. And in our case, the scroll direction, we want to be horizontal. So we want this thing to flow horizontally, not vertically, horizontally. So we're going to give it a scroll direction of horizontal. And then we're also going to give it a minimum line spacing. This is the amount of space between each cell in this layout of 0. So our cells are going to be completely flush up against another, no gaps. Sometimes we want gaps, but in this case, we want it to be 0. That's the flow layout for our collection view. Our actual collection view, we create like this. We go UI collection view, frame, and we want this one here. We're going to give it a frame of 0, meaning it has no frame or size when it starts off. It's going to start off completely empty and small. And then here we pass in the flow layout we just created up here. Now we've got our collection view. And now this, you can think of this basically as like a scroll view or a table. We're going to start doing some things with it. We're going to lay it out. So in order to lay it out in iOS programmatically using AutoLayout, of course, we always need to set auto resizing masks equal to false. Then the neat thing about collection views is every collection view has a cell. So I don't know if you know what like a table view is, but when you have a table view, you have a table view cell and you can pass in your own custom cells for table views. Well, for here, we do the same thing with a collection view, only we need to register ourselves explicitly the cell we want to use when this collection view runs. So I'm going to go ahead and register a cell, which we haven't created yet, but we will. It's going to be called a playlist cell. This is one you and I are going to create in just a minute. This is the cell we're going to register, and we need to give it an identifier. The identifier is basically just a string that uniquely identifies this cell and lets us dequeue or reuse it over and over again because that's part of the efficiency built into iOS. When it creates these cells, it stores them and then it reuses them. And the way that you pull it out of the pool again is with this playlist cell ID. So we're going to create an ID. It's just a plain old string. This is our cell for reuse with identifier. We're going to plop you in there. And that's how we're going to register our to be created cell. Now, once we've got that set up, we can start doing other things. I'm going to give it a background color of our nice, pretty Spotify black. And it's not auto-completing for me nicely because I haven't defined this cell yet. So that's okay. Just bear with me as we type this out. And then I'm going to do something else also. When we create our cells here in our flow layout, we actually want them to be able to swipe back and forth like this. And there's a property in the collection view which makes this really easy. It's called, we basically enable paging. So in our collection view here, I can go is paging enabled and set that to be true. And that's going to give us some nice paging functionality automatically. That's one of the nice things about these collection views. They have some built-in affordances, which makes things like this really easy. And then finally, a collection view behaves just like a table view in that it uses the protocol delegate pattern to basically set itself up as the delegate and the data source for the collection view. So here we're going to go data source. This is going to be equal to ourselves. Whoops. And then collection view delegate, that is also going to be equal to ourselves. Delegate. And after that, we've created our collection view. To really make this compile, though, we need to go and create the cell and then set ourselves up as the delegates for the data source and the delegate. So why don't we go ahead and do that now? Starting with the playlist cell, let's just go ahead and go back to our menu here and go Command N. I'm going to create this as a separate class because it is going to contain some logic and functionality later. So let's go playlist cell. And let's just quickly stub out a very simple playlist cell. I'm going to call this import UI kit, class, playlist cell. And this is going to be of type UI collection view cell. So just like in table views we have cells, in collection views we also have cells. This is just going to be a plain old cell like this. And I think this is all we need to do for now. We're just going to instantiate it. We're not going to do anything with it. We're just going to use it as is. So let's go back to our home controller now. Hopefully now this will, if I do a Command B, just to let it compile a bit, that error should go away. Great. And now it's saying, hey, we don't have anything called Spotify Black. Really? The reason why it's complaining is because I went background view here when I really meant to go background color. That was my bad. There we go. So we're going to set the color to be our nice Spotify black. Enable the paging. Now here, we just need to implement ourselves as the data source and delegate. And what I like to do for these is because they're a little bit separate from the functionality, sometimes in my own view controller, I come down here and I do those as extensions. So let's come down here and create an extension on our home controller. And let's create an extension for our collection view data source. So this will now tell us these are the required functions that you need to implement in order to conform to this protocol. I'm just going to go ahead and let it stub it out for me. And in here, this is basically where we're returning the data, which is going to power our collection view. So eventually this is going to be things like tracks and cells, and we're going to figure out, how to make all this nice stuff come up. But for now, all I want to do is just get basically a colored cell coming up and verifying that we can swipe between these things. So I'm going to go ahead and just create up here a variable called colors. And this is going to be equal to, this is going to be of type array UI color. And all I want to do here is basically define 3 colors. So I'm going to go system dot, let's see, red. Let's go system dot blue. And let's go system dot, what's a nice one, teal. Those are 3 colors. This is basically going to be our data for the page, as if we'd actually gotten this from somewhere. And in this case, number of items in sections. So this is basically like the number of rows in our table or the number of rows in our collection view. I'm just going to return colors.count. So that's going to basically say, hey, there's 3 items in our cell. 1, 2, 3. And they're just going to be colors for now. And then for the cell at item at, here's where we need to dequeue and return our cell. So here we can go let cell is equal to our CollectionView.dequeue reusable cell. And what we want to do here is we want to grab the cell with the same identifier that we registered up here at the top, this playlist cell ID. So we're going to go ahead and just grab that, bring that down here, use that as our reuse identifier. And we're going to grab the cell for the index path. Well, it tells us what index path this cell is for. So we can grab it just like that. Now we don't want this just to be any UI collection view cell, which is what it is right now. We want it to actually be of a particular type. So I'm going to cast it as our playlist cell. And normally you want to be careful when you're using an exclamation mark like this. This is a harsh cast. If playlist cell didn't exist at runtime, this program would blow up, which is not good. So normally you would want to unwrap this more softly as an optional here and then provide a different implementation in the event that playlist cell wasn't there. But just because this is more demo code, this is a little more short, I'm just going to force it here. I know playlist cell is going to exist, so I'm pretty safe with that. And once I've got that cell, I can then do something interesting with it, like change its background color. So that's what we're going to do. We're just going to go cell background color. Go ahead and be the background color of whatever color we are based on the index of what was passed in. So it's either going to be 0, 1, or 2. And we're going to change our background color depending upon which cell we're on. And we're going to get that from the index path dot item. And then we just simply return the cell. Phew, okay. That's a lot of work. Are we there yet? No, we got one more thing to do. We need to set ourselves up as the delegate there. So let's just quickly do that. Let's just come up and just with the same pattern that we did before, go extension, home controller, delegate flow layout. I don't think I need to do anything here yet. We may have to, actually there's one thing we do need to do. We need to set up our size. So every cell in our collection view has a size. And we basically want to say how big is this cell going to be that we're putting on the screen here. And what we'd like this cell, which is the whole thing going around here, we'd like it to be the full width of the view controller here and the full height, but only the height from under the menu bar down to the bottom. We can basically do that with this chunk of code here. So this is a function called cell for item at. This is a part of the flow delegate layout, and this is responsible for setting the size. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a CG size object here, and we're going to set the width to be equal to the frame width of the entire view, going right across there. And also we're going to set the height to be equal to the collection view's frame height. Now, how does the collection view know what height it's going to be? Well, it knows because we're going to lay it out right here, which we haven't done yet. So sorry, one more thing to do before we can actually see this. And I'm just going to quickly walk you through the auto layout for a collection view. It's going to be very similar to Menubar up here. Let me just make some space. What we're basically saying is collection view. Let me bring you up over here. Collection view, which is the whole thing sitting under here. Top anchor, we'd like you to be right under the bottom anchor with a multiplier of 2. That's going to be about 16 points. So here you can see the multiplier syntax for auto layout. That's going to give about a 16-point spacing. Then we're going to go leading, go ahead and make it flush with multiplier of 0. Trailing, make it completely flush with the multiplier of 0. And bottom anchor, let's get the collection view bottom anchor going right down to the view area layout guide of our view. Now you'll note here the order of these, just when you're using these APIs switched, it was always collection view, menu bar, collection bar view. When you're doing auto layout, they can change depending upon whether you're on the trailing or the bottom. That's why here view comes first, collection view after, view comes first, collection view after. But that's basically how we can lay out the collection view, our menu bar. And now if we run this, we get a build failed because, oh yes, we forgot to return our collection view here. So this being a computed property, we always need to return whatever it is we're creating. Let's go ahead and see if this runs now. And it blows up, I suspect because I forgot to add the collection view to our view. So let's go ahead and open our, home controller. Let's go back. Actually, let's just take a look at the error message just to see what's going on. Unable to activate constraint with anchors because they have no common ancestor. So when you see an error message like that, it usually means we forgot to add something to a view and we're trying to set up auto layout constraints around it. So in this case, what that was saying is you've got a constraint between a collection view and a menu bar that I can't handle because you haven't added the collection view to my subviews. This is what I forgot here. So I'm going to have to go add view, collection view. So now that these are both part of the view, now these things can have auto layout constraint relationships with each other. Let's try Command R and see what happens. Okay, this one looks like it's going to build. And voila, there we go. We've got our playlist view here, our artist view here on our album, and note how we're scrolling. The scrolling is working because we did this page enabled. So we're flipping back and forth, and this is great. This is the beginning of what we actually want our real one to look like, which I can bring up over here. We're of course eventually going to replace these with a nicer bit of sound functionality like this, but this is great. We've got this, moving around. It's looking a little more animated, and that's super. Okay, so let's just review what we did here. We've got a menu bar at the very top, which we've created. We've added some buttons to the top, which we've done auto layout. And then we put all of that, in addition to a collection view, inside a new home controller, which enables us to swipe and give us some functionality, which we know we're going to later want to use and set up as we set up further cells. Now, as you can see, what this doesn't do right now is a couple things. One is it's not changing the color of the labels as we swipe. Two, when we tap on these things, we don't yet have the interactions where they change these. So we're going to look at that in the next episode. I'm going to try to keep these a little bit shorter and break them down a bit more. But basically, come back next week and we'll see how we can basically set up the interactions so that when we tap these things on the top, these buttons, the interactions move. We'll also look at how when we go like this, we can swipe and change what's selected up here. And eventually, we're going to do a complete episode on this magical little green bar, which does a whole bunch of really cool, powerful things. Okay, but that's all for today. Thanks for coming, everyone. We'll see you next time.